Yay! I think we got it. Everyone can see that, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so as promised, today's presentation is about Native Americans. And so when we say Americans, many people think of the United States. And that's true. I mean, it's sort of another word for the United States. We say, oh, I live in America, I live in the United States. But of course, as many of you know, America is bigger than the United States. There is something called North America, the continent of North America, which includes Canada. It includes that state of Alaska, that we have. And then, of course, it includes the United States of America. And it also includes the area south, Mexico, and the smaller countries that are called Central America, right? And then, of course, there's South America. So America is the idea of these two continents all being referred to as America for the purposes of today's discussion. So Native Americans, wow, they were here long before the Europeans came. And as a matter of fact, we're going to talk about that and talk about just a little bit. We have some words to look at here, and then I promise we'll go back to pictures. But I do have just a short few little paragraphs to share with you. So, long before those Europeans came in the 14 and 1500s, there were 60 million Native Americans just in the United States, of what we would now call the United States. 60 million. Wow, that's a pretty big population. But of course, the Europeans also brought with them diseases, sickness, and that killed almost all of them because they were not accustomed to, they had not been exposed to these deadly diseases. The English words for them are smallpox, measles, flu, which I'm sure you know. They did not have any exposure and no immunity to these diseases. And so as more Europeans came, many of them died literally from disease. And it's absolutely tragic. Of course, many others, Europeans moved west, and they brought with them weapons. And they wanted to take over the land that the Native Americans were living on. And it was a very ugly time in our history. This includes what is now the United States, but it also includes Canada, what is now Canada, Mexico, Central America, and South America. There were lots of Europeans coming over. They wanted that land. They wanted to claim it for their kings and queens in Europe. And it led to horrible wars and horrible killing of Native Americans. And it's a very tragic, sad part of this very long history of over 600 years. What was left, eventually, the governments and those Indian tribes, we call them tribes, a particular group of Indians, they made essentially an agreement with the government to take some land and to set that aside for Native Americans to use as they pleased. It was theirs. But in many cases, the land wasn't very good, or it wasn't part of their original land. And so they had to travel great distances on their own to get to this new land. So it was a horrible time for Native Americans in our history, and really an embarrassment for our government. We treated them horribly. As I said, it's very sad. It lasted for hundreds of years, and it's only been in the last 40 or 50 years that the United States government has sort of owned up to their responsibility and is doing a much better job at providing for the schools, economic help, all of this for Native Americans on their reservations. The amazing thing is that today there are only 7 million Native Americans. It's such a tragedy. And there are 500 recognized 574 different Native American tribes. And by tribes, we mean a particular language and culture. All of those Native American tribes, it's not like they all got together and used the same language. They all had different languages, different cultures, different ways of living based upon the land they were living on at the time. Many of them were along the ocean, along the sea, so they fished. They were more used to working with the water and with those, with the food that they could get from the sea. Others were more nomadic, meaning they traveled, nomads. So they moved from area to area based on the weather and based on what animals they could find to live on, and based on what crops they could grow to live on. So today there are actually 326 different Native American reservations, meaning land that has been set aside for Native Americans. In the United States, it's amazing. That's a big number. Just a real quick big map of those, of what we call the Americas. So you have North America, right? Canada, Alaska is way up here. Here's Canada, United States, Central America, Mexico, all the way down into South America. And there were native tribes throughout this entire area, many, many, many years ago. Today, this map shows the number of reservations and where they're located, and it shows their relative size. In other words, how large and how small. You see in the east part of the United States, there are many reservations, but they're very small. The land that is set aside for them is quite small. But as you get further west, you'll notice here, particularly in the mountain states, wow, these are big reservations. They cover a big area. And we're going to look at a few of them in just a minute. But you can see many, many more reservations in the West. And part of the reason for this was that the Europeans landed here in the East in the 14, 15, 1600s. And then they just started pushing the Native Americans west. So they landed here and they landed here and they landed, and eventually they got out here. Now, of course, there were other native tribes that already lived here, but many of them were relocated. Those reservations were set aside here, for example, in the state of South Dakota. Many of those reservations did not exist. And so Native American tribes from the East were pushed west. So you see so many of them. And this map is pretty interesting, I think. It shows what percent of the population in that area is Native American today. And as you can see, we'll start with Alaska. Wow, it's huge number of Native Americans living in Alaska. And you'll see other areas too, particularly in the West, like we talked about, in eastern Oklahoma, in New Mexico, in Arizona, California, Montana, and in my state of Washington. They're pretty high percentages. These darker colors represent a high percentage of Native Americans that live there. And this one shows the percent, what percent of the whole. And in Alaska, it's 19% of the population. Well, almost 20% are Native Americans. And of course, these northern provinces of Canada are almost entirely Native American, 85%, oh my goodness, 50%. And even down here in the United States, New Mexico, 11%, Arizona, where I was just last week, where I was talking to you from, or 2 weeks ago in Arizona, 6%. So you can see, it depends on the state you're in, But as you go to the east, fewer and fewer, not as many Native Americans living in the east. So let's look at this state of Arizona where I was recently. I was in Tucson, way down here by the Mexican border. This is the border here. I was in Tucson. As you can see, there are big areas. These are the size of Kirovograd Oblast. These areas are quite large. And you can see Apache tribe, the Tohono O'odham tribe, the Hopi tribe, the Navajo Nation tribe, which is a huge Native American reservation. The Havasupai, the Colorado River Indians, Fort Yuma, Gahichan tribe, Cocopa. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these tribes, and they're very large. So what you tend to see as you drive on the highway, you're driving on the big American highways, and you see a sign, and instead of it saying, you're in Arizona, it says, welcome to the Navajo Nation. Welcome to, you're now in a different place, even though you're in the state of Arizona. And some of these places are in the West are sacred sites. They have a special sort of a religious meaning for those Native Americans living there. And a lot of it has to do with the geology of the area. And this one is called Window Rock for good reason. You can understand why that would be called. But it goes back thousands of years. It has great meaning to the Navajo Nation, the one that we just looked at in the previous slide. So moving further north up to my state of Washington, again, you can see there's a lot of reservations here, and some of them are really big. The Colville, the Yakima, the Quinault, and then this one here, the Chehalis, is right near where I live. It's not far at all from where my house is. When I go out on my bicycle rides, I often ride right through their reservation. And you'll see these signs all over the state of Washington. They're usually made of wood because we have lots of trees. And so you'll see these signs talking about you've entered the Colville Reservation. And these are big places. This is 1.4 million acres of land. That's a lot of land. That's a big, big area. And you'll see these signs as you drive, on the roads and on the highways around each state. Families. Okay. So Native Americans, many, many years ago, they were purely Native American. But like most Americans, now they are a mixture. They are part of our culture. So you might find Native Americans that are half Native American. Their mother might be pure Native American. Their father, who knows, might be Ukrainian. Who knows? The United States is this big, mixture of many different nationalities from all over the world. And so in many cases, you'll meet Native American families that are sort of a mixture. You see different types. Look at that little cutie. I like these pictures. So this is a Navajo Nation. We looked at that picture a few minutes ago of the Navajo Nation, and these are Navajo Native Americans who live on the reservation. And it's important to distinguish that not all Native Americans live on the reservation. They can live there and they have certain benefits for taxes, for owning land that they don't have if they live somewhere else. So depending on their family and what they like to do for a living, they can choose to live on their reservation, or if they want to get a job in a city, they can say goodbye to the reservation and just be part of the larger culture in Now, some of you may have seen these pictures. In the western part of the United States, the tribes that lived there many years ago were nomadic, like we talked about. They were nomads. They moved from area to area. And the way that they did that, they didn't build houses, like we would. They had something we call a teepee. And it's a piece of fabric. And they would put these sticks in the ground, like you see here. And they would wrap the fabric around it. And that's what they lived in. It was like a tent, but different, because they could actually have a fire in the center of the teepee. The teepee was open at the top, and that would allow the smoke from the fire to rise up and go at the top of the teepee. And so this was quite traditional for many of those Western tribes that we looked at previously. And in my part of the country, in the state of Washington, we have lots of trees. It rains a lot. We have the ocean. It's a very different place than the Southwest. And so they made wooden houses, and they decorated them incredible, these amazing designs. And this is where many of you've seen these things that we call totem poles. It's a description of the important people in that tribe. And it shows their face. It shows what the tribe does. In this case, they are fishermen, right? They fish, and it tells a story. So this particular totem pole tells the story of that tribe. And again, in other parts of the Southwest where there were cliffs and mountains, many of the Native American tribes, this is almost 2,000 years old, this dwelling. They literally created these small cities they built into the side of the cliff, incredible. And these are all now preserved. They're part of parks, national parks around the United States. And this is one of the very oldest Hopi Nation villages. It's 1,100 years old. It's called First Mesa. And mesa means a tall, flat hill. A hill, but instead of having a peak, it's flat at the top. So First Mesa is the very first hill when you enter this part of Arizona. And Barbara and I actually visited this town several years ago when we were supporting a daughter of a Hopi family that we got to know. And we drove into this town on this little road, and this town is 1,100 years old, still being lived in to this day. It's had people living there for 1,100 years. In the Navajo Nation that we talked about a few minutes ago, there again, also in the desert, you see these big prominent rocks all over. Well, they built their houses out of what they could find. And of course, it was this red dirt. And of course, they needed to have a fire, so they built a way to have a fire inside. And you see these as you drive through the Navajo Nation. Further east, where there were trees and they had access to, more abundance from nature, they built log cabins, much like the European settlers did. This is a Cherokee Native American cabin. And as you can see, it's built in the same style as many of the Europeans built when they came. And then there are the costumes, the dressing, really colorful, just amazing. And each tribe has their own colors and their own designs and their own dances that were part of their religious ceremonies. Just amazing. These colors and the dances are really fascinating to watch. And another culture that that I am reminded of that has colorful dress. Certainly it's different, but not that different.
We need some cats, our Ukrainian guy.
Yeah. I think this guy would like to have one of these. This Indian headdress. We call it a headdress, yeah, with the eagle feathers. The feathers were supposed to show how brave that person was. And if you had many feathers, you were very brave. So I think our guy here needs an Indian headdress to finish his outfit. But that's looking pretty good there. The flowers are looking very nice there. Yeah, really colorful dress. You know, at the tribe that I mentioned that I live next to, the Chehalis tribe, they have 2 or 3 times a year where the people who live on this reservation do the same thing that you're seeing here. They dress in their native dress. They dance, they put on, you know, a little performance for people who come to watch. That's amazing. Look at those feathers. Incredible. And yes, American politicians like to visit Native American reservations now. Of course, this was our President Obama several years ago, visiting a Native American tribe in Arizona. You can see these colors are they're just amazing. The dress is so colorful and so fascinating to see. So now we're going to talk about a few famous Native Americans in our history. Probably the most famous is a Native American woman named Sacagawea. And she was a Shoshone Indian, what they call a Lemhi Shoshone Indian, who was a great help to early European American explorers as they moved from east to west. She was their guide. She was the person she spoke many different languages, Native American languages. She was very knowledgeable of the territory. And she traveled with these 2 fellows shown in this painting, Lewis and Clark. They're famous in American history, as they were the first to explore the West for what was then the new United States government. And so she traveled with them all the way to the West and all the way back. She became very famous for providing this help to them. And then today, in the present day politics, many prominent Native Americans are serving in our government. This is Deborah Holland. She is now Secretary of the what we call the Interior, the Land Secretary. And so she sits on the cabinet for President Joe Biden. She has a very high position in the US government. Some of you who like to watch movies might know a few of these faces. This is Benjamin Bratt. He's a famous American actor. He's been in a lot of shows. And one of our astronauts has Native American heritage. John Harrington, he was on one of the space missions that went up to the space station recently. Angie Harmon, who's a pretty famous American actress, she is Native American. And then going back in history, this is back to the early 1900s in the Olympic Games. The decathlon champion, the one who did those 10 events in athletics, was a Native American. He won the gold medal. And I think it was, I want to say 1912. It was many, many years ago. His name was Jim Thorpe. And there he is. He was the gold medalist in the Olympics all those years ago. And now we have a new, they call it district attorney, which means you are the person who charges criminals with crimes. She is a brand new US district attorney, quite famous. It's a very high political position in the United States. And she is the first Native American to be nominated to one of these positions. Here's a real famous actor. Oh, wow. He has been in at least 50 movies that I can remember. Lou Diamond Phillips, he's a Navajo Nation tribe. And Johnny Depp, for those of you who know about Johnny Depp, he has Native American blood as well. Going on to the governments. Now, we talked about each of these reservations having their own government. They do. And they meet like governments just like anywhere else in the United States. They have a leading council. Usually it's what they call a chief or a mayor. They'll have a group of council people who join them to help make decisions. And as you travel from reservation to reservation, it looks in many ways like sort of normal American government. They're in charge of providing services for the people who live on the reservation. They have a little, sort of the seal or the picture of their government. This is the Cherokee Nation. And they meet in buildings like any government building in the United States and have meetings and make decisions and help support the people that live in that area. They all have websites. So if you're curious, you can search Native American governments and you'll find websites for all of them, all with pictures that look like this. And of course, they provide schools. The US government has finally, done much more in the previous years to provide money to build modern schools. And as you visit, particularly in the West, you'll find many of these schools are on the reservation. In other cases, the schools are located near the reservation and they're a combination. And other Americans that go to that school. But where I live, in this part, we have many schools that are just Native American schools. Lots of happy students. They look just like that, right? In Kropivnitsky. Happy to go to school. They can't wait to go to class. Yeah. And here's a picture of a new Native American school out in the Southwest where I was a few weeks ago. And yeah, that's the American flag. And then that flag is the state of Arizona. I recognize that. And then that flag, that other flag, that's the flag that is for the Native American tribe, for that particular tribe. So they have all three flags. And of course, medical centers, hospitals, clinics, all of this has been built on these reservations. Each reservation almost always has their own medical facilities. And they have a police force. There's the Navajo Nation police force. So if you're driving too fast and you are, in a rush, you might have a chance to meet one of these very nice policemen when they stop you. And of course, there's lots of businesses. These tribes have to find ways to support themselves. So many of them have business associations where the businesses work together to create a good economy. You'll find Native American banks. You'll find all kinds of things. And of course, the ones that are here in the state of Washington, they're next to the ocean. Many of them have very good fishing businesses. They go out and they fish for crab and lobster and oysters and salmon and all these fish. And as we talked about a few weeks ago, the US government has allowed Native Americans to operate hotels and casinos on their reservation. And these are pretty fancy. Many of them are really big buildings with, pretty amazing casinos located in them. And you'll see these all throughout the United States. If you visit a larger Native American reservation, you'll see many of them operating casinos there. And of course, it makes money for them, but it also provides a lot of jobs. Many people who live on the reservation have jobs in these casinos. We have school buses on the Native American reservations, just like you find in the rest of the country. You'll find the little yellow bus going down the road and picking up the students and going to class. And this is quite common. If you were to drive through much of the United States, you would come across a reservation. The houses are not real fancy. Usually they're fairly basic houses. You'll find a lot of agriculture, animals, growing various crops. This one is in South Dakota, the state of South Dakota, but this is quite typical. You'll find small communities like this that are Native American communities. Here's their school, here's maybe their hospital. This is quite common what you would see as you travel across the United States. And of course, many of these reservations are near amazing scenery, amazing sights. And those that do have that, they try to attract tourists, have people come to those places to see, to maybe pay money, to stay in the hotel, to go on a tour, to take advantage of the natural beauty in that area. And then, of course, you can come and stay in a teepee. This is like a hotel. You move in and you stay in the teepee for a night. Not much internet probably, but it's interesting. Interesting experience. And then, of course, in the Southwest, maybe you'll stay in an old, what they call an adobe style building. Many of them offer tours. A Native American member of the reservation will come out and provide a tour. They'll tell you about the culture. They'll show you their language. It's a part of American culture. And of course, they'll almost always, if you get there at the right time, you'll have a chance to watch one of their ceremonial dances. And that's it. And I thought next week, if you're interested, yeah. And I thought next week, if you're interested, we'll do one on New York City.
It's amazing topic for the next time.
Yeah, I figured there would be people interested in New York City.
I have some pictures as well. If you want, I can show you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I have.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, we'll have.
And what's interesting, I've been at the top of Empire State Building. So at this one, so amazing.
That's great. I'm looking at this, just at this picture. Yeah, I've been in most of these buildings. I used to work in this building. See this building right here? Yeah, I worked way up at the top, right there. I know it well.
Cool.
But yeah. So we'll do that. I hope any questions at all on the Native American presentation? I know it's a big subject, but did you have any questions?
Silence.
No questions. Well, okay. I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something. And I look forward, we'll do this again next week. Yes, Christy?
Yes, sure. If you don't have any other plans and you're able to make this.
No, I am free next Friday at 6:30 in my morning, so I will be here.
Okay. We will come. It's very interesting topic. A lot of things to show for the students. That's nice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if that's all, thanks everybody. Nice to see everyone.
Thank
you. Have a very nice Friday and a relaxing weekend.
For you too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay.